G'day, how's it going? I've been going at this programming thing inside Unity for 10 hours a day for almost 2 years now. And I wanted to share a quick project I whipped up to help someone else out, as they're exactly where I was when I started. Now look, ChatGPT to me is what steroids were to athletes in the 80s. I'm honestly too lazy to read. Who's got time to read? It sure as shit isn't me, even though I have to shift through the piles of terrible responses from chat. Also, I am sick of hearing ChatGPT. So I'm going to be referring to it as Chad. Yes, how original, I know. Anyways, with a little help from Chad to get fast track on APIs and a lot of problem solving and troubleshooting skills, anyone can build something. Programming is a dry topic. It's like when a banker tries to explain how great their job is. Money. Right. Well, programming fills me with a sense of fucking broken help me. The project I'm going to be glazing over is a shooting range minigame. I had to practice that so many times. It somehow was written like a tongue twister. Something I name is something I screw myself on. Nice. I spent just near 15 hours. Well, 14 hours and 57 minutes to be exact on this project. So if you're expecting a serious breakdown on anything, whoa boy, I will rub sand into your dirty little beady eyes. The purpose of this video is to explain my approach to building games, not so much the code involved. But if this video gets one whole like, I will painstakingly break down everything step by step. I'm a masochist, what can I say? Let's get into it. Simple boss, we make the project. And Finn, great show, thanks all for coming. Oh, the rest of the video? It's blank. Are they gone? You know, the ones that are going to kick my shins for my ability to code and project layout. I'm a visual person. I like seeing what my scene's going to look like before I get into the actual nitty-gritty details of the code. It helps me center myself before I get lost over the fucking edge. Hedge, over the hedge. I get some lines racked up and put them in intervals of 5, 10, 25, 50, 75, and 100. And while we can dictate scale and I actually view the world like this, I'm going to be using meters. But, you can let your imagination go wild. You can use feet or freedoms per distance. I like to make everything to scale, and not compensating or anything, but I scale a 2 meter height capsule to represent a person. This just lets me get a rough height for the barrier to stop players from being able to walk into the firing range. Look, I know that much about gun safety, alright? Now with everything created, I throw it all into one nice neat box. You know what's not neat? Spending half an hour on something to make it look pretty, to later having to change it because everything goes balls up in the air. Oh, sorry, spoiler ahead. Everything goes balls up in the air. See this right here? That's overlap. Turns out it's a bit of a pain in the ass to handle on trigger collision events with overlapping colliders set up the way I do. As much as I like to take the piss, seriously, this is target fixating. Pun unintended. Don't do this to yourself. Create basic and build upon it as you need it, unless you have a clear goal of your project's direction. I set up the targets on alternating sides and offset them by the range markers that I've mentioned earlier. I throw in a quick blank cube to use as my spawn spot, even though it actually never runs any spawn logic. I do use it later. I then throw together a quick weapon, and I'm on my way to being a serious Roblox modeler. Disclaimer, I don't know how to use Blender. I give it a quick bit of detail such as the sight, casing ejection port, and color the handle. And I must say, as basic as it is, I kind of like it. I place it down on the range and decide to use some slightly different materials and drag them around the range to get some slight details, which can actually help you orientate yourself. I then create some projectiles, and in this case, some bullets, combining capsules for the casing and a sphere for the tip. Just the tip. And wow, that is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. Alright. I scale it down to size and lay out 3 on the barrier, and it kind of looks good. It's such a simple effect. I throw a quick player controller class together that uses input axes, horizontal and vertical, for simple forward, back, left and right controls, and a variable for the movement speed. It's time to test the scene. Yep, we move as expected, but it's hard to get a feel for it until we attach a camera to the view of the player. Now remember, I'm lazy. I grab the main scene camera and just attach it straight to the player's prefab and move it into position. Since the scene is just an enclosed range, I don't have to change the field of view or the distance, since the range is only 100 meters in length. Stock settings will get the job done. Can't relate. I wasn't happy with how my character was moving around at this point. The movement felt like it was delayed or sticky. Sticky. Fucking child. I ran through various fixes for this, including time fixed time, using the movement method. Fucking sticky. Jesus Christ. Wasn't even that funny when I wrote it. Ran through various fixes for this, including time.fixTime and using the movement method to be called on a Unity method called fixed update. This made no real change. I spent half an hour trying to fix my movement class, and I asked Chad to give me a hand. And while Chad can be a champion sometimes, a lot of the times it can get stuck in a loop. And this was one of those times. After going down the rabbit hole that Chad had suggested, I decided to revert changes and go back to using the standard update method. And I thought I'd build playtest the game and see if it was actually noticeable in the build version. And yep, the editor was simply exaggerating the effect. And I just realized as I was typing the script, the reason it was is because I'm used to higher refresh rates. See, in one of my other projects, when I playtest my scene, I'd get coil whine in my fans for my CPU cooling system, not to be confused with the GPU coil whine. To stop this, and not to have to replace my fans or my controller, I had to run the editor at 60 frames a second. Technology hates me, and I hate it. Since I already had chat up, I had it take my current class and add mouse look functionality to it. I also made sure to lock the mouse to the window so your cursor wasn't drifting around when you're clicking things at the same time. I hit test again and I realized my player was moving correctly left to the right, but not up and down. Same though, I always try to go up, but I somehow end up going down. And this is some quality movement going on in my scene. What is this? I also noticed my mouse sensitivity while I was playtesting was extremely low, so I decided to make the sensitivity based off a variable and set it to 1000. I had mistakenly preempted Chad's response and I put in a plus instead of a minus for looking direction. And holy shit, Batman, this is more sensitive than my nipples in winter. I set the sensitivity down to 500. And the look direction was a simple mistake and easy to rectify. This is why you should proofread what you're getting from Chad. And reading isn't my thing. I mean, come on, man. I'm lazy. The game was starting to take shape. We had a character, we could move, there was targets, and a weapon. At this point, ideas where this was going were really starting to flow, but I decided to make something as a salute to RoboQuest. I wanted to create a simple gun pickup mechanic. I would get the player to walk up to the gun, have a button prompt for equipping that weapon. I decided to go with an on-collision trigger event for the gun pickup. When the player enters this area, this will enable a text on a world canvas that would have a face camera class attached to it. I didn't yet add the gun to the player. I just wanted to knock out having the prompt appear correctly as the player was approaching the area and then make it turn off when the player walked away or if the gun was picked up. I try not to use any packages outside of Unity or any other tools that you have to import. Now look, you can use default text for this, but I've only ever used TMP Pro, which is a part of Unity's inbuilt tools anyway. So if you want to crucify me for that, do it. But it's a hot jump skip over to the package manager and then just under the Unity's register and it's available right there. And here's video proof that I do code myself, sometimes. I decided it would be easier here to break down the steps into methods that came more transparent. I mean, to me at least, so good luck everybody else. Look, I said I code, I just didn't mention the quality of my code. Again, purely because I knew the scope of this project was going to be tiny, I decided to go with lazy referencing and making everything public. I don't normally do this, which is why if you've got fast vision, you'll see me constantly forgetting to reference these fields. Have you ever coded something and it doesn't work? That was a stupid fucking question. Of course you have. We all have. But you go back to throw a debug line into it to test it, and then suddenly it works? Seriously, how does this happen? My on-trigger event just straight up wasn't working, and now it is. I have a better chance of dividing 0 than I do working out how this works. With that being said, here's the pinnacle of my disbelief. I had to test it a few times just to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. Jokes on me, that happened long before. Okay, we can now move, look, and pick up the weapon. After dealing with this for almost 3.5 hours already, I wanted to take something a little easier. If you couldn't tell already, I like to talk a lot of shit, and I wanted my personal touch in this project. Originally, I was going to go with the stereotypical Texan, but I didn't want to stereotype anyone, so I made a stereotypical Australian. Now, I thought the longer a player lingers at the start, the more pop-up text should appear. Typically, people already know how to move, but what if someone didn't? After all, this is an indie game, albeit an awful one. So I settled on having some dialogue, and for whatever reason, if the player doesn't move, the game text will tell them the controls and tell them where to go to get things started. Crazy, I know, not many games do this, but hey. But that's the charm of being a gamer. Getting into game dev, there's principles you can't just teach anyone. Alright, kids, story time. I actually used to be a technician for the Navy, and there was this common phrase called engineer's touch, which would best be described by knowing that something's right. This applies to game design. Someone who plays games will inadvertently get a good feel for the design. I created a class called Quest System for this, and it runs off a coroutine from the start of the scene. As one message fades out, another fades in, and it will do this for each message referenced in the array. Because I was testing my scene so many times, trying to get these messages in the UI to play at the right times, I was constantly having to start and stop the scene. And I actually started to notice that my camera was pointing to the ground every time I started the game. It was reflecting 000 as my rotation values. After trying to fix this for 20 minutes myself, it was time to activate Go Gadget Chad. But guess what? I got stuck in another fucking loop. Chad doesn't do too well when it comes to rotations and orientations, unless you're explicitly precise in describing your scene and requirements. Maybe I should ask this guy on how to become a ChatGPT engineer. Man, I like to take the piss, but this is next level. Again, I decided to just build test the scene. And well, what do you know? It's so good. I was just wasting my time again, just because editor things. Right, it was time to let the player have the weapon be equipped. Again, people, I'm lazy. I add the gun straight to the player as an inactive object in my scene. When the player presses F on the weapon, on the barrier, it sets that gun false and enables the gun on the character. I move the gun on the character to be a child of the camera instead, so the gun actually moves with the camera now. Now I need to add a gun that has a firing method, because what's the gun that doesn't shoot? Fuck, actually, I don't know. Hey Chad, what's a punchline to this joke? A misfire microtransaction. Man, Chad's got an even more buzzword sense of humor than me. I control the shooting method from the player controller class and instantiate the bullets from a fire point which are placed at the front of the gun. Since we're about to start shooting things, I also add a score to the UI. This will both add to the game and help me troubleshoot. And the bullets don't move, because I actually forgot to add the script to the prefab. Smart. Now with that fixed, the bullets fire directly off to the right. So I offset this by changing the angle at which the bullets spawn to 270, and now the bullets are coming straight out and going out the right way. The bullets themselves were rotated 90 degrees on the y-axis, which is why my bullets were fired moving towards the correct direction now, but facing the roof. I simply went to the prefab and manually rotated the bullet to counter this, and it's working. Sort of. So here's the thing, I really screwed up the targets with their overlapping colliders. I was a little stumped on whether this issue was coming from the bullets, rigid bodies, not hitting my targets, or targets themselves. So what I did was I had the bullets destroy the object when they collided that collider, which was actually the issue. While I was working this out, I got tired of having to restart my scene, so I had the targets just set inactive and then reactivate themselves after 5 seconds, effectively creating a respawn. I'm using physics-based projectiles, and I'll be using gravity. And I want to introduce the very thing that people hate. Bullet drop. Since the range is only 100 meters long, I set the bullet velocity to 50. So at 50 meters, the projectile would actually start to feel the effects of gravity. So shooting at targets over 50 meters need a slight adjustment. Now, before you want to burn me alive for saying the bullet only feels the effects of gravity at the 50 meter mark, I'm well aware of what I said. It's not the hill I'll die on, but those are the words I chose, okay? Leave me alone. I added a crosshair to the center of the screen and changed my code so that way the gun would fire based off the crosshair. But my projectiles were moving at a velocity of 50. And when I was testing, I can't actually follow the bullets, right? It's a lot faster than I can register, especially since it's not in the focus. So I would need to introduce traces or something to give visual feedback to the player. And this would also work well for debugging, as I could confirm whether the projectiles were landing or not. I decided to use bullet trails. Now, being totally unfamiliar with bullet trails, I asked Chad to provide me with a class that could help me better use these bullet trails. And holy shit, it's actually amazing right out the box. With both bullet trails and crosshair now, again, it's starting to feel like a lot better of a game. Meanwhile, my target class would only work for colliders attached to the same object as itself. But this was a bit of an issue when the design of my target was made up of objects with their own colliders combined together. See, my target class would be assigned to each ring on the target, and each ring would be worth different scores. This took me a long time to figure out, and even Chad again was looping. I was running out of ideas. When I said I was lazy, I should also mention I'm a creature of habit and stubbornness. If I had from the start just accepted that my targets weren't going to work with my current class, I wouldn't have spent hours on it. Yet, I did. I ended up removing the target's current design and replaced it with spheres that would stick out through each other instead. This would work with my current target class. Now, while it is overlapping, it's not overlapping as part of the same instance of the class. When a bullet hit any of the target classes, it would also then go on to disable the parent object. Then after it was set to disable, a coroutine would start a timer, which I called respawn time, and set it to 5 seconds. And it was easy as that. The targets would reappear. So this was a basic shooting game now, but I wanted targets to move. It shouldn't be that hard, right? You know the definition of insanity thing? I might need to go get myself checked out. So I decided to go with placing down cubes, stretch them out and disable their meshes and keep their colliders active. I then tried to program my targets to randomly respawn anywhere within that collider, and this was the result. Turns out, I'm dumb. The target has colliders and rigid bodies. The rectangle on the ground has a collider. Gee, I wonder why my objects weren't spawning inside that area. All the while, I was still trying to get objects to both spawn back in and move. So I was getting this weird glitching behavior. I had to take a step back and implement these systems one at a time. I started back with spawning and managed to get that right. Then I had movement to deal with. Of course, of everything in this entire project, this is the one thing that took me the most amount of time to fix. 3 hours. I had to use both Chad and GitHub's Copilot and I still couldn't solve the issue. I was back at the drawing board. I decided to stop trying to use rectangles to get the area of movement for the targets and settled on making 2 spheres to represent max left and max right positions. I would reference these in the target class. I also needed to think about how my targets would choose their side when spawning. I wouldn't want my targets spawning on the same side each time. That would be too predictable. And trust me, being unpredictable is the best thing for you. So I introduced the random method called from Unity's API. Thanks Chad for reminding me on how to use this, because I genuinely have the worst memory. When the random method chose what side to reactivate the target on, I would have it always move to the opposite side that it spawned on. When it reached the bounds of any side, it would just start going the other way. Simple. But again, target fixation. I could have saved myself hours if I'd just changed my approach. But sometimes even talking to ChatGPT in itself can solve issues because when you're describing things, you have to break these things down. And you have to think about it differently when you describe it. And that alone can actually prompt you to come up with solutions to your own problems. With a bit of cleanup in the hierarchy, it was time to put the end game in sight. A simple way of tying this game up would be to add a countdown timer. And that's exactly what I did. Because I didn't want to rush the player and offer the option for them to actually see what I had written at the start, it would make sense to start the game on a round timer when the action starts and not just from the very start of the game. God, do I wish my timer didn't start until I had any clue what I was doing. My timer still wouldn't have started. I then throw together a game UI so the player knows it's over and show them their final score, because if they were trying to beat their previous score, they probably wouldn't be looking up at their current score mid-game. I throw in a leave game option so you don't need to Alt F4 and a start again button. Start again button. Yes, please. I also make sure to unlock the cursor so the player can actually interact with their menu with their mouse. And I pause the time in game so that nothing in the game moves around, and when the player left clicks, they're not shooting anymore. I have friends that would take advantage of this and would continue shooting in the end game panel, which would continue to accumulate their points at the end of the game since it's reading that live points variable. It's crazy how much you have to think about when you're building a game, but it's pretty great when you're able to see things from a different view. We go from how can I break this game to so how can I stop these heathens from breaking my game? I want to make sure I make my games unbreakable as possible, so people like the spiffing Brit can't take advantage of it. I mean, the graphics of my game alone are enough to stop that, but hey, one can dream. Also, fun fact, anyone who's not played with game engines before, these models you see here can all easily be swapped out for higher detailed ones. So if this gameplay looks appealing to you, but the graphics are the letdown, well, I have a game to sell to you. With the end game panel done, I add a start game panel, so we can start the game from a menu rather than being thrown straight into the round. It just gives it that more friendly feel. Since we're now starting the game from the start button, when I disable the UI panel, I then lock the mouse back to the game in that order to prevent any bugs with the cursor. And there we have it. We have a start game, an end game, and an ability to replay. It's a basic gameplay loop. Because this was originally a project I created to help guide someone, I decided to take a few extra steps. I created 2 different game modes, a hard mode and a maniac mode, which don't do anything other than increase the movement speed of the targets, and it was just to showcase how easy it is to tweak variables for different use cases. The different difficulties also made me realize I should probably reward the player for shooting targets further away, rather than just camping the closest ones. So balancing with respawn timers, and/or add a simple distance multiplier that can do that. I elected the latter. For me, introducing new mechanics is easier than going through my wet noodle code. If I do a deep dive on this project, I will do a section on refactoring. It does make life a lot easier, and if you're new to coding, it sure as shit helps. Originally, I was going to use those rectangles that were giving me grief spawning the targets, and when I tried to use them, my bullet trajectory would change when they entered them. Because I was already near done, I decided to immediately stop going down that route and just add a multiplier field to the target class and multiply the score by it. If a multiplier was times 1, the score would be unchanged from the original value. I could then simply scale the reward based on how much harder the target was to hit. I did another build playtest, and my sensitivity was way too high. Again, the editor was different to what my actual system would be experiencing. So I added a slider to adjust the sensitivity of the look speed. I actually forgot to make this save this setting, so unfortunately every time between rounds you have to change it. But if I do the more in-depth breakdown, I will go over fixing that. Now we add the option menu to the start menu, add the exit game option there, and we're done. Well, almost. We just need one thing, sound. Hardcore. If anyone doesn't get that reference, Disco Elysium, go play it now. I went looking for a good enough sound effect for the gunshot. And can we stop to talk about fake fucking websites for a second? What is with websites advertising themselves as free, but then tell you to sign up and then giving you a trial? That's not free. Even if I paid for it, if I lapsed my payment period, I won't retain the rights. You and your shoddy business practices need to vanish. I digress. Know where there's great free sound sources? YouTube. So thank you to this channel. This will do. I trim the clip just to the part I need and throw it just in after we instantiate the bullet being spawned in. So that way the sound won't play until the bullet has actually spawned. You know why I love RoboQuest? Their sound design is one of the best I've ever had in a game. Although the music is just to enhance the feel of combat and urgency, you can really kind of get into a rhythm of it. I wanted to create a sound system just like it. Well, I mean, at least as close as my peanut brain no musical rhythm would let me. I had Chad show me the API and methods I needed, and I got to work. I started with a fade out on the main track, and then I would fade in the next track when it was called. I already had a music loop, which I purchased from a software bundle from Humble Bundle, and jumped over into Premiere Pro to start looking at the volume levels to help me decide where I wanted to insert my cuts for the loops, and for the next track to play. I saved these cuts as separate tracks. I then assigned each one of these clips to my music controller class. I had a menu music called from the start, I had pre-combat music for when I pressed the start button, and then I had combat music start when I picked up the weapon, and then I'd go back to the menu music at the end. And while it's not perfect, it certainly encapsulates what I was going for. One final touch I actually added off recording was the spawn-in bullet casings from the gun's ejection port we added at the very start. I added a rigid body to the casings, spawned them in with slight velocity coming out up over the top. This was just to simulate that it was being ejected and then physics would take over, letting it fall to the ground. I didn't bother despawning these, as the rounds do only last for 20 seconds. And in that time, you won't be able to spawn enough to crash or freeze the game. After all, this isn't the Starfield Potato Simulator. Please don't break my game. And with all that, that is how I built my gun range minigame. As for you, yes, you. If you want to see a more in-depth guide on these systems or to see the code I used, let me know in the comments. If you did find this video useful, please also let me know. And for this project, that's about it. Until later, see ya.